Scissoring. It's one of the most iconic yet most misunderstood acts in the entire queer lexicon. Pop culture has turned it into a punchline or a pornographic fantasy, leaving a cloud of myths and awkward questions in its wake. But what if we pushed through all that noise and talked about what it's really like? The pleasure, the communication, the laughter, and yes, the logistics. Today, Dr. Kat Arnella is going to talk with me about scissoring. She recently wrote a blog called Making Scissoring Work for You. If you want to read it, you can click the link in the show notes below. Dr. Kat, thank you for being here with me. Your blog makes an important distinction between the terms scissoring and tribbing. From a psychological perspective, why is the language that we use for our sexual acts so powerful in shaping our identity and experience, especially for folks in the LGBTQIA plus community?
Language can play a large part in how we make meaning around anything in our life, whether that be related to sex or not. It impacts how we learn about information, how we remember information, how we make meaning. When we think about sex, especially, that's an area where there is a lot of meaning, sometimes imbued in the way we think about language or the labels that we have for sexual acts. It can be really helpful and important for people to have some agency around how they label the sexual acts that they're engaging in. With the LGBTQ community, there are so many expectations about sex that come from more heterosexual, cisgendered scripts. That's how a lot of people learn about sex. That's what a lot of people see about sex. And so oftentimes the language around sex can be really isolating for people when that doesn't quite fit. For one trans woman in a lesbian relationship, the word scissoring could be extremely affirming of having a lesbian sexual encounter. For another trans woman in a lesbian relationship, they might find that language is restricting and doesn't feel quite right. I think the main thing is understanding that you get a say in how you want to label these things, and that can be empowering.
I really love that. It's important to focus on that language does define our reality. If we're using words that don't align with our identity or with the context in which we wish to be understood, it can feel really hard to feel expansive in your sexuality. Or if you're engaging in sex with language that doesn't fit your identity or the context, it might create or reinforce this idea of feeling like an imposter or feeling like you're doing something that's incongruent. So, having the language that really feels empowering for each partner in a moment is super important. So, in your blog, you placed a huge emphasis on pre sex conversations about comfort, preferences, and even silliness. Lots of folks find it vulnerable or awkward to have these kinds of detailed conversations. What psychological barriers do you see partners facing when they're initiating these conversations? And what are some strategies to make discussing sexual preferences feel more collaborative and connective and less like a performance review?
Yeah, I think one of the major barriers around having conversations about sex beforehand has a lot to do with just the fact that we don't see that. It's not really modeled for us in popular discourse. Not only is it not represented in movies or books or pornography, but it's also not part of most people's sex education. So a lot of people already are maybe feeling uncomfortable just because they don't have experience or they don't know how that conversation is supposed to go. Not to mention, sex for a lot of people comes with a lot of emotional baggage. There's a lot of meaning that's tied to it. So it can already be a really sensitive and hard topic for people to talk about. Some strategies to explicitly go out of the performance feeling of a conversation like that. I think being able to talk about how you want to feel and some of the things you want to experience can be a really helpful way to frame the conversation.
I think where you may be going, and correct me if I'm wrong, is this idea that you don't necessarily want to sit there and be like, you did this well or you didn't do that well. I liked that
Mhm.
or I didn't like this. Rephrasing it in I statements definitely is a big step toward better communication. But if I'm hearing you right, Really saying things like, I really loved how I felt when you did XYZ. It's
Yes.
a way to position the experience in a way that really centers pleasure and appreciation for each other's efforts. So if there's something you don't like necessarily, you could say, when you did this, I was feeling XYZ, but I really want to feel ABC. And I think if we tried this, or that next time, I could feel this way instead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that also goes with how can you lead with appreciation in those conversations, especially if this is a sensitive area. Can you say, I really appreciated this part, or I really loved how that felt? I'd like more of that. Let's try XYZ to your point about coming with I language. I think that can also be a really helpful way to have this feel less scary as a conversation.
Also, making it a regular practice is really important to take the anxiety down, right? If you never talk about sex, if you never debrief with your partner about what's going well or what maybe could use a little revisiting, then what happens is the one time you do, it's like, whoa, this is really coming from somewhere important because we don't talk about this. But when you make it a regular part of the practice of pleasure, then it's like, hey, I'm expecting to hear what you liked and what you didn't like. And that's cool. Then I can integrate that into next time. And it feels a little less weighted, a little less stinging, right? If you get a feedback of, oh, I really appreciate that you tried this new thing and I didn't feel the way I thought I might feel when you did it, but I'm so glad you tried it. Now we can check that off the list, or next time, maybe let's tweak it in this way and see what could happen. That kind of practice of hearing feedback gets a lot easier.
Absolutely. I think we see that in sex therapy all the time too. Just the practice of talking about sex and doing that makes it way easier.
One of the things that you said in your blog, it really struck me. You said scissoring can be silly. That's a word we don't really associate with sex very often. And sex is so often portrayed as this really intensely serious and very flawlessly passionate thing. So, how can we embrace the potential for awkwardness and laughter and trial and error and have that actually be part of what reduces anxiety and builds connection and intimacy between partners?
Sex can be all sorts of things. It doesn't have to be perfect or passionate or intense. And I think oftentimes the anxiety about sex and the need for it to be so perfect comes from that idea that sex has to look one specific way. When we let go of the need for that, oftentimes the anxiety can dissipate along with that. If you're no longer needing a perfect outcome, however you define that, then there's no longer a need to be anxious about meeting that outcome. And the reality is that if you're going to be trying any new sexual position or act, there's going to be trial and error. There's going to be maybe some awkwardness or things that don't work or something really funny. And your ability to laugh about that and connect can be really intimate as a couple. Exploring it offers a way to view sex as not just a method of obtaining an orgasm, but a method of connecting with your partner. Laughing over something is a way to do that.
I think a lot about how we see scissoring depicted in media, especially porn. When you think about the difference in what makes for good film and what actually makes for good pleasure, there's often a disconnect. And so I find that a lot of folks will say, gosh, I tried this thing that I saw in porn, or I tried scissoring in this position or in that position, and I didn't really feel much, or it didn't feel like I thought it would feel. So part of the silliness and the trial and error can be laughing at yourselves and with care, like laughing with each other, not at each other, how it might not look like what you saw on TV in order to have the best pleasure. And maybe sometimes the position you're in looks sort of silly. If you were to take a snapshot and look at yourselves, you might be like, that's a weird place for an elbow to be. It can be really fun to not take yourself so seriously. And it actually makes pleasure so much more accessible when you're comparing yourself or getting critical on the unexpected things. Well, then you're in your head and you're less in your body. I love in your blog how you reframe scissoring as a customizable act of pleasure. How can letting go of any preconceived media driven scripts help people, regardless of orientation, focus more on mutual pleasure and connection instead of performance or comparison?
This gets at a point you made around getting out of your mind and into your body more. When we have these ideas of what it needs to look like and we're trying to meet those, it's really hard to stay in our bodies. If we're trying to meet a specific expectation, it's hard to stay there. And it's hard to let go of those scripts. I'm not suggesting, like, oh, just let go and you'll be good. I mean, that's oftentimes what we're doing in sex therapy is helping people rewrite those narratives. If you're able to think about what is helpful for your pleasure, what do you want to experience? Are you open to scissoring being playful or intense or emotional? If you can be open to that, that allows you to access this in a way that feels less pressured, less performance driven, getting you back in your body.
I think it's also important to note that different partners might have different preferences. What turns one person on might turn another person off. And so it's really important to think about how do you create mutuality so that as long as you're not being asked to do something that you really don't want to do, if you're open to doing something that's less interesting to you, but more interesting to your partner, can you create moments of centering each other's pleasure? So that mutuality doesn't always need to happen at 50-50 in every single moment. But what does it look like to say, okay, my partner likes these toys when we scissor, or likes this specific position, or likes this kind of stimulation. And today we agree that we're going to really focus on their pleasure and their presence in this. And then next time we do it, we'll focus on mine. I like these kinds of positions and toys or lubricants or this sensation. There's a lot of permission to get creative with each other and really exploratory, even if you don't always like the same thing at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's really important because so much of the media driven narrative is that both partners, assuming there's two people in this scenario, are supposed to be the same level of into this, the same level of pleasure happening from the exact same scenario, which is highly unlikely.
Yeah. In your blog, you talked a lot about people who are scissoring in bodies of different sizes, flexibility, and physical ability, which is so refreshing. Let's talk about how concerns about body image or physical limitations can create anxiety that interferes with pleasure.
I think one thing to preface this with is anybody in any body is going to have needs and adjustments when it comes to sex. Everybody is going to have to access this in different ways. We don't get education about this. We don't see this represented. We don't learn how to ask for adjustments or ask about needs getting met. And so that can make it really hard to approach. For people with larger bodies or physical disabilities or anyone that might need an adjustment that isn't talked about as much can be really scary to approach, especially if there is internalized shame around needing an adjustment. And a lot of people don't know their options. A lot of people don't know that they can go get a cushion specifically designed for holding up your body in a sexual position, or get straps, or ask partners to physically move parts of their body for them. In terms of specific strategies or suggestions, it's not a one size fits all. But I think the main thing that is applicable to everyone goes back to the conversation beforehand. So, are you comfortable talking with your partner about the fact that you might get tired or that you might need something under your elbow to help prop you up, or that you have muscle spasms? How can you make sure you're in a position where you're less likely to hurt your partner if you end up having a muscle spasm? Can you shop for a cushion together? Can you look at aids together online? Maybe that's something that makes it feel a little bit more collaborative and fun. I think the main suggestion or tip centers on a conversation around needs, and those needs and preferences are going to be applicable to everyone.
I love that. Really, it does come back to communication and remembering that we all have the permission to feel comfortable during sex. The more you can work with your partner for both of your comfort needs to be met, then conversations like this can feel more accessible and part of what's fun in the erotic buildup. Any last thoughts about scissoring that you want to offer folks who might be listening or watching?
I would would just say it can be fun. I think sometimes people are really scared by that word because of all of the different myths and ideas about what it represents. And you don't have to scissor if you're a lesbian, and that is supposed to be the only way to have sex, according to the media. Anyone can access this.
Thank you so much for taking a few minutes to chat with me. And for everyone watching or listening, if you have questions, comments, drop them down below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Thanks so much.